I'd like to welcome Mark Ryan from the City of Gold Coast to the stage. And Mark's going to talk about where they've used research in severe wind hazard assessment and how they've operationalised that in their work. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Al, and good morning, everyone. What I guess I want to just touch on in the next 10 or 15 minutes is where we've taken the severe wind hazard assessment South East Queensland, a really, really important piece of research undertaken by Geoscience Australia, James Cook University and the 6 South East Queensland councils, and what we've done with it. So that's a quote directly from the report that significant effort should be invested in to provide disaster decision makers at every level with a shared understanding of the risks, the situation, the capability so that they can agree on the best decisions for the communities that they serve. And part of our response to the severe wind hazard assessment is Program AIR, which is Advocacy, Information and Resilience, is centering that reduction of community suffering and how do we reduce that during not only severe wind events, but in this particular project, that's what the focus is. We know from Tropical Cyclone Alfred that the vulnerability of our city is increasing and increasing rapidly. And if I simplify vulnerability, for me, it's a lack of choice. Does someone have a choice to relocate? Do they have the means to relocate to somewhere safer? And we know that that is increasing around that. So the report was there. You can't really unread it once you've read it. And that's, I think, some of the discussion this morning around how do we take research and get rubber on the road. I think for the start is that we actually read it and understand it. So validating the gap. Christmas night of 2023 can be compared to a Derrico. It's been called many things. What it was a predominantly straight line wind event that came across the back end of Scenic Rim and Logan and then across the northern part of the city. It'll always be recorded at 106 kilometres because that was what the official bomb recording was on the Seaway, but through our partnership with Pat and the JCU guys who we've engaged heavily on this project, we saw damage in excess of 200 kilometres an hour, and particularly around some of the downbursts, Discovery Drive in Helensvale and Wonga Wallen, where we had significant damage, and unfortunately one person lost their life. Then, of course, what's fresh in our memory is TC Alfred and the impact that we had on the Gold Coast. So I guess from the Christmas night storm, the I in the report, the information, we were, I guess, grappling before that event saying, how is it that we get at the dining room table at our community level at the Gold Coast, how do we get that it could be a cyclone risk? That helped us, to be honest with you. That event was a real wake-up community call. It was an interesting event because if you were in Broadbeach or Main Beach enjoying Christmas, you wouldn't have known what happened in the north of the city, quite frankly. But certainly our residents in the north well knew what happened in there. So what we saw in Alfred was a different event. It was less impact as far as we didn't see those significant 200 kilometre hour winds, but what we saw was a citywide impact to that. That's just a really quick snapshot. We've done a lot of work between the comparison between the 1954 Gold Coast cyclone and the TC Alfred, a very different city, and maybe next time, not maybe, it'll be a matter of when, we'll be a different city again. We're growing towards 1 million people within the next 15 odd years. Largely a lot of our city has been developed, so the next development is moving up and continuing to moving up. But some really interesting facts here, and I'm more than happy to share some research we've done around that, particularly around some of the infrastructure upgrades that led to this positive result. Another discussion this morning was around politics. And I note the discussion was around politics and votes. Politics is also policy. And what we did is I believe as disaster management practitioners, we should be the bridge between academic research and making the what if. So what does this actually mean, and what does it mean from a policy perspective? And that's what we did. And we took it to council, and council have resolved, and really pleased, re-resolved on Monday, a commitment of $100 million over 5 years to co-contribute towards places of refuge. So that's predominantly the R part of the resilience. So just talking just really quickly now through the AIR. So current building design criteria. My favourite lines on social media during TC Alfred was from our friends up in North Queensland saying, we don't get out of bed for a Cat 2. You've also got very different building standards and a lot different resilience levels. So that was a good learning. So the current building design criteria and guidelines may not be suitable and sustainable in the future. So there's lots of discussions, and that also has to be tensioned with a housing crisis and a cost of living crisis, and how do we do that? SEQ represents significant exposure with 500 plus suburbs, 900,000 plus homes, and 60% of the Queensland population. So what we're doing is a multi-pronged attack, and this is the household level. So we're doing a household level, a community level, a city level, a state level is what we see. And we've just rolled out, and the James Cook University guys are actually on the ground this week inspecting the first 40 homes that have signed up to that program. We're going to take the learnings, and then we've invested in that there'll be 1,000 self-assessments funded from February, March next year. So really, really good partnership between James Cook University, the City of Gold Coast, and the Resilient Building Council. Modelling shows greater than 50% of Queensland communities will see an increase in the intensity of rarer, severe tropical cyclone events. So the report is clear, less cyclones, but far more severe, and that's around that community information. So what we've done is we've stood up a bespoke piece of work around getting this uplifted, and now we're reintegrating it back into the Get Ready messaging to make sure that it's also part of the all hazards messaging. But we are looking at innovative ways, and as part of that $100 million commitment is actually looking at how we can get better innovative ways to get that on the table. The tropical cyclone subplan. So again, some of the other research and academia we're bringing in is you can have a subplan, everyone's got plans, everyone's got subplans. How do you stretch the thinking of the decision making within that? And recently we've partnered up with Dr. Mark Crosweller, who's an ethics professor, and some of the decisions that our decision makers will have to make in around things like tsunami, rapid onset events, and cyclones, and they are going to have to be very solid ethical decisions. So we're now starting to move into a really, really stretched phase, and how do we actually make that with a view to actually having an ethical decision-making framework within the next 6 months that we can actually apply around these significant events and our sub-plans. A place of refuge is not the same as a place of cyclone shelter. So we're getting now into the infrastructure part of the program, which is the large amount of the dollars. So we're looking at all of our city centres, community centres, libraries. Originally we had a view to retrofit. A lot of the research would indicate that that's probably not the cost benefit, so we're now looking at new builds. And so effectively we are now sitting at the table as DM practitioners at the infrastructure program control groups, sitting there saying, what are we looking at? You're looking at that in 4 years' time. We then do a disaster resilient shelter needs assessment. So we're looking at, does it flood? Is it accessible? And then originally we looked at, do we apply the funding and bring the entire building up to importance level 3, for example, to withstand, say, a Cat 3 cyclone? Makes the buildings pretty ugly, to be honest with you. So then we looked at, and it's pretty expensive. So we're looking, we still don't have the exact number, but it's certainly in excess of 10% of the project cost. So now we're looking at, well, what does it look like around the large part of the building? So if it's a community centre, the auditorium, build that up. And then in the worst case scenario, it might see that the rest of the building might be significantly damaged, but the place of refuge would be maintained. So another discussions this morning about we need to relocate people, and we've got to do that. Ultimately, we've got to have a risk appetite and understand what that is. And whilst we take calculated risks with development that are acceptable within our risk tolerance, we then have to accept that we need to relocate people, and that vulnerability is going to continue to go up. So that's the work we're doing around that. And so we're probably about a horizon of 7 years out now, and we've identified that. discussions around whole levels of government, and that's what it's going to take. And acknowledge Jimmy and the QRA here, who we've partnered up to do a number of these seed projects. But as we get into the big infrastructure projects, we absolutely, we've actually put our first project forward for the DRF, which is the Ormo Community Hub, which is going to be our first development that the city's committed to as far as having importance level 3 factored in. And finally, what's big for our city is obviously strata. We've got a huge amount of strata across our city, and we've been doing a bunch of strata study industry engagement. We did that as a voluntary. We just called out to body corporates and said who'd like to be involved. And again, through James Cook University, we're now starting to understand where the strata resilience levels are for both places of refuge, if we need to do, but then also providing advice to developers and to body corporates around how they can increase that and the advantages. So that's where we're at. The tropical cyclone Alfred, I think we dodged a bullet, is what people have said. In many ways, that's a double-edged sword, because there's a fair bit of complacency now around cyclone. So if we think a little bit bigger than what I've just spoken about, we only have to look at the report. So the severe wind hazard assessment Southeast Queensland, scenario 1, which if you go back a couple of years, Jane Sexton somewhere in the room, exercise Varankus, thank you. That's what it practiced on. So if scenario 1 happens, which is one of the 5 scenarios that the report unpacks, that's the impact to the Gold Coast. So that's where we're thinking about, and how does it look like? We've seen the traffic data. If we try and evacuate the Gold Coast, doesn't work, and it'll probably have that many unintended consequences. So therefore, we have to look at how do we build the resilience, how do we have the places of refuge, and understand that the people and their triggers and where they get to go and where. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have some questions. One, and I was going to say we look forward to seeing this as a co-presentation at the Research Forum next year. Great to see ethics as part of the intended decision process. How will you deal with the different perceptions of what fair or equitable are?
Really great question, and that's something that we're just starting to unpack now. Sometimes it's going to come back to what is realistically possible versus not.
Another one we've got there, how do you balance messaging between residents and your massive tourist population?
Fantastic question. So yeah, our population at the moment is around about somewhere around 700,000, and it can swell to about 1.2 million around Christmas and New Year's. So we have strong connections, both Gold Coast Airport, for example, sits on our local disaster management group. We sit on their security group. Very strong relationship with getting messaging through that. We also have, Council has 3 funded entities around the Invest and Experience Gold Coast is one of those. One of the things that we did during TC Alfred was run industry briefings. So we had industry briefings with the tourism industry, so all of the key operators that also then have the arms out. But we also have Invest Gold Coast that have a really good reach around our small businesses. And then, of course, the sense of the Friday night when the event was impacted, we rely on emergency alert.
Another one we've got, and this might also be for Pat's team, so we might have to take it on notice. How does the wind speed of 106 kilometres an hour compare with cyclonic conditions and the design of buildings to Australian standards? I think that's how does it compare with northern Queensland cyclone-prone areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't answer that in 2 minutes, Albert. We actually have got the JCU report that shows what impact it would have had at the predicted wind speed of 160, and I'm more than happy to share that through your network.
Any more questions from anyone in the room? We've got time. Or online, if you want to add them in. Yep. We've got... Are strata buildings or individual households generally higher risk? Are strata buildings or individual households generally higher risk?
I think they've both got their risks, and depending on the age, what we know about the strata buildings, and particularly the high rise, is that the building quality depends on the aspect quite often. So it's actually not the entire building is resilient, so it is aspect driven around the development controls. But certainly some of our older stock in some of our older suburbs would definitely, and interestingly in scenario one, I think the numbers up there would be around our hinterland areas, which would be far more exposed than the coastal areas.
Lots of questions. We've got Mark, thank you for a great presentation. How does your disaster management plan address the needs of people with disabilities?
Yeah, fantastic question. So our disaster management plan doesn't specifically deal with that, but our Get Ready plan does. So we've increased our community engagement. We used to do 5 big events a year. We'd be at the big Mudgeeraba show or the Gold Coast show. We're still there, but we're actually now delving deep within the industry, not only within our disability network, our culturally and linguistically diverse group. We have a huge multicultural group. And not only that, we have a huge amount of people that have moved up from Sydney and Melbourne recently, and New South Wales and southern states. So what we're constantly doing is a scan around where is our vulnerabilities. We also have been doing some work around that with our common operating picture for a response stage as well, around understanding that. But a huge amount of work, particularly with our community resilience officer around the PCEP program and embedding that within our communities.
Great. Any more questions from the room? On the back.
Hi, quick question. So much building work is going on in the Gold Coast, new homes, high rises, etc. Are building standards going to increase to mitigate the more hazardous weather that's going to be predicted, or are they sort of sitting as they always have done?
Yeah, good question, and that's part of that advocacy work. It's not a simple answer. We have ongoing discussions both within the industry, insurance. Last week, in fact, Stacey and Jimmy and I were down in Canberra having discussion around a roundtable with Suncorp and the federal government. So at this stage, no, there's not. But what we are doing is building it at the community level as far as that incentive with the resilient homes. While we continue to have the discussions, it's a really big discussion to have.
There's a few more online. Is there any support for disaster recovery funding for strata buildings, especially dealing with limited sinking funds and a responsibility falling on owners?
Yeah, look, that's part of the advocacy work in the AN program area is also working with insurers. So what we know is from a strata perspective, there are people that are forward thinking in this, and there has to be an incentive to do so. But as far as disaster recovery funding, it applies as per the guidelines across that, and we have done some work in the past with that. So as far as proactive work, it does sit with the landowners, but we are looking, as I said, at working with the Insurance Council around that incentivisation where people are doing that work.
We have one question at the back here.
Hey, Mark. Just wondered, do you have, as part of your information program, any work in there about promoting what options potential motivated homeowners might want to take if they elected to, regardless of any other program, to upgrade their homes?
Yeah, it's on the table, Jane. Thanks for the question. And we know that there's a couple of online tools around self-assessments. So we are actually assessing them at the moment. There are a couple of products, and we think that we will probably, Sue's going to nod here, in 6 to 12 months. As I said, there's a number of tools, and we think that there's actually some really positive ones in all of them, and we'll come up with that and look at co-partnering rather than redevelop with something else.
Hi, Mark. Diana Young, Community Recovery. Just a question around the grants program that I noticed that you had there as one of your objectives. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're intending to do there?
Yep, so that's basically the grants program would be driven by the city to incentivise people to become more resilient. So that's some of the work that we're currently doing with this pilot, with the inspections around what does that look like. That will then inform what the grants program. So the city does a grants program on a range of things, and what we're doing is pulling it through that to incentivise people. So it's in its inception while we do this work with James Cook University. Yep.
Mark, can you tell us about fire ants in disasters, please?
Sure. Ben, what would you like to know about fire ants in disasters?
So in
Sounds
our
loaded.
most recent event, we had to get a heap of emergency fodder out west. And the biggest challenge we had was convincing people to stop volunteering fodder from areas that we couldn't clear as fire ant declared. You're on the border with New South Wales and you've got fire ants all around you. What does it actually mean for you guys in planning?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to the Christmas event, Ben, which you were the Deputy State Recovery Coordinator for. I'm sure this is not a loaded question at all. We had a central depository, so we looked at where we would bring all of the green waste. We were lucky that we did have a site that we could do that. And in bringing so, as it came in, we were treating effectively the fire ant. Now, that doesn't solve the entire program because we had to transport it there, but it was something, particularly when we mulched that and then offered it back to the community as mulch, that was something that we did. But it's an ongoing program, Council. We've just committed another 3 officers to it. So it's something that we've got to absolutely be aware of. But yeah, where we can do the sensible mitigation, it's not foolproof though.